All right, we want to welcome you here for our Wednesday night class. Obviously, we are not in person, we are online, but we're thankful that you've chosen to come and worship with us and participate in this. Just a couple of announcements, reminders before we get into our singing and then in our class time in just a few minutes. We're still on with our schedule to meet for worship on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m., so please come and join us for that. Afterwards, we won't be having class. But we will continue to have our Wednesday night classes online as well. So we want to welcome Lance and thank him for being here with us. And we hope that you have an enjoyable worship time with us, and most importantly, that we can glorify God through it.
Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways, and step by step you lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways, and step by step you lead me, and I will follow you all of my days, and I will follow you all of my days, and I will follow you all of my days, and step by step you lead me, and I will follow you all of my days.
I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay. Though some may dwell where these are bound, but where my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost high, and catch a gleam of glory bright. But still I'll pray till heaven I found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground.
All right, we are continuing on in our series from this book, The Jordan River Rules. We started off several weeks ago and looked at the first two. The first one was realize God means for you to move forward. And then what we looked at last week is say no to discouragement, say yes to strength. And so now together, Lance and I are going to tackle rule number 3. But before I even mention it, I want to look at our verse for this week. And that comes from Joshua chapter 1, verse 11. Listen to this. It says, get your provisions ready, 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go and to take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. That's from Joshua 1, chapter 11. They're about to cross over. And there's a few things I want to point out from this verse. And really, it's in no particular order. Really, the premise of this verse, this commandment from God, is first and foremost, get ready. Get ready for the fact that I'm going to lead you places. I'm going to take you to a new land that I have promised you. Another thing is that you're now going to cross over. That is going to be end of an era, a chapter, and a beginning of a new one. Remember, this is something, Lance, that they had highly anticipated for really like 4 decades. Yeah. I mean, they've been wanting to go in, and now God is saying, okay, now is the time. The punishment time has ended because they didn't believe that God could lead them. Now he says, okay, get ready. You're going to cross over. And then another thing he says is, God is giving this to you. Now he's gonna say you have to do something in response, but he wants them to know, look, I have planned this out, I've prepared this, I am giving this to you. And then he's also going to say, but you need to take possession of it. And I think that's important as we look throughout this passage is to be reminded that God has given us these gifts, but it's our responsibility to accept them. If you're given a treadmill for Christmas, by taking possession of it means that you're actually going to use it.
That's a terrible gift.
It is a terrible gift, but it benefits no one unless it's like, house cleaning day and you can hang your stuff on it.
If you give me a treadmill, it better come with like shackles, because that's the only way I'm going to use it.
So you not only have to receive that gift, but you have to accept it. And then the last one is that he says you're going to have 3 days to prepare for this. And so I guess the question I want to ask is, and we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on this 3-day, is there something special? Is there something magical about these 3 days?
I absolutely love what he did. And it doesn't take a lot of ink on the page. I mean, that book is short. This chapter is short. But he talks about all of the times that it just kind of happens in the text, that there's 3 days that God's people wait before they do something. And the title of the chapter is actually Step Up to the Moment. And it's like before that moment that you step up, oftentimes there's 3 days.
Yeah.
And we don't think there's anything necessarily magical about it. It's not like a spell that gets cast. But it does seem to be an appropriate amount of time to think about something.
Yes. And so we're not here to say that, if you want to prepare for something, it has to be exactly 72 hours. But the idea is that you're going to spend some time preparing for that moment when you step up.
Yeah.
So there's some biblical examples, and I think you're going to start us off first.
Yeah. So just to warn you, there's 11 of these.
Yes.
And so we're going to touch on all of these. And the first one is a chance to search your heart. And so in Genesis 42, Joseph has risen to a very high rank in the Egyptian government, and his brothers who had sold him into slavery show up, and they're trying to buy grain. And Joseph doesn't know how to process this in the moment. So he wants restoration with his family, he probably thinks. And so he puts his brothers in jail for 3 days before he goes to them and tells them the plan that, listen, you can go back, but somebody's got to stay, and you got to bring Benjamin back with you. And so he leaves them in jail for 3 days. And I'm sure that during this time, Joseph is processing, like, how am I going to handle this? What's the moral thing to do? What am I going to do? He also wants his brothers to look back on their guilt. And we know that this works because when Joseph goes to him at the end of 3 days, they tell one another, they don't know if Joseph can understand them. They say, surely we are being punished because of our brother. During those 3 days in jail, they were looking back on their lives and they knew that they had sinned. And so sometimes we just need 3 days to search our hearts, whether it be the brothers that are searching for sin or Joseph who is searching for forgiveness or what am I going to do about this?
Yeah. Okay, so this next 3-day period that we're going to look at is very different from the first, and really it's different from the most of the ones that come after it. And David, very young, or very early on in his life when he was still young, he's anointed king. But he's not going to sit in the throne then. He's going to go back out to the pasture. He's going to slay Goliath, still not going to be king. He's going to make his way into the palace. He's going to be playing the harp, soothing Saul. Still not going to be king. In fact, ultimately, he's going to go on the run.
He chunks a spear at him.
Yes, I mean, he's
Everybody's
dodging
boss
spear-
does
yeah.
that occasionally.
So, all this has happened, and finally, he becomes king. And so then we have in 1 Chronicles 12:39 is there's a 3-day period when David and his fellow men, they celebrate God's faithfulness. And so I just want to talk a little bit about how important it is to spend time celebrating when God is faithful, especially when it takes a long time. And I wanted to find a picture of like celebrating the rain as though there's been a drought. And it just so happens, this is a picture of the Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Redemption when he finally gets out of prison for a crime he didn't commit. And he's celebrating the fact that he's finally made it out. And I think it's important for us to know when we think about these 3 days, sometimes it's for introspection, sometimes it's for thankfulness. This one, for David and his men, it was a time of celebration after a really long drought.
I'm really glad that one is there because it would be easy for us to sound very puritanical and legalistic and ascetic, like, oh, just get off and punish yourself for 3 days. That's the godly thing to do. The celebration is actually a spiritual discipline.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So super glad that one is in there.
Yes.
Okay, so this one is before a monumental journey.
This is number 3.
Yes. And so the Jews are in Babylon. They've been under captivity for 70 years. Cyrus the Great, according to prophecy, is going to send the Jews back home. Ezra is going to lead a group of these exiles back. And before they leave Babylon to go back to Israel, there's a group of these exiles that they're going to meet on the banks of the Ahava River. And apparently earlier, the king said, do you want some soldiers to take you back? And Ezra's like, nope. God protects his own people. We don't need the soldiers. And later on, he says that, like, after he said that, he was too ashamed to accept the soldiers' protection. And so they gather around, and in Ezra 8, verse 23, it says, so we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayers. And in 8:21, it says that we humbled ourselves before God, and we asked for safety for us and for our children. And so just that idea of before you have a big journey that lies ahead of you, fast and pray for 3 days. Talk to God about it. Talk to God about the safety of your children.
Yeah. Okay, so my next 3-day adventure that I'm going to be talking about comes from Nehemiah. So you can already guess, Nehemiah, he's curious about what's going on in Jerusalem. He hears word that things are bad. He asks questions about it. He prays about it, and he weeps over them. And ultimately, he's going to have an opportunity to go back and help rebuild the walls. And I also love that this is in here because not only is the 3-day period not just a time of fasting, it's not just a time of celebration, but here it's to prepare, in this instance, for a new project.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes, we kind of just funnel down, okay, fasting and prayer, that's only for the spiritual things. But I think, there's a lot of times where it would do us well as we begin, a new stage of our life, whether it means heading off to college or starting a new job or even thinking about our finances, like invite God into that. Allow there to be a period where you can say, okay, God, what would you like to have happen through this? If you stumble upon an opportunity where you get a raise and you can already spend that money away in your mind, spend some time like, how can God be most glorified through this? And so when you start a new project, when you're like Nehemiah and you're building a wall, spend time in prayer for that.
Okay, I'm so bad at those types of things. I need to spend 3 days in fasting and prayer before I start a small plumbing job. I mean, any task with my hand, I should be praying and fasting for 3 days.
Yes.
My next one is when you stare down evil. And so this is a well-known story in the Bible. Esther is a Jewess. She is married to the Persian king Xerxes, and Haman has kind of baited or tricked Xerxes into declaring a law that basically is going to mean genocide for the Jewish people. And Esther has to navigate these weird palace rules. Even though she's married to Xerxes, she just can't walk in and talk to him. And she has to navigate these things where, like, she's going to bring about the safety of the Jewish people, but she's risking her own life to do it. And Haman, for lack of a better word, is evil. And there is evil in this world. And I don't think that we can just flippantly stare it down. And so she asked her friends to fast for 3 days while she prepares herself to go and do this very challenging task. And then we all know the great line that maybe she was put here for such a time as this. Yeah. And so if it's that important, and if that quote gives us that many goosebumps, it's worth fasting about for 3 days before you stare down evil.
Yeah.
And I was looking at you as I said that. I was not implying that you're the evil.
Yeah, whatever. I'm so jealous. Like, you're so smart. Like, you wrote on the back of these to help you out. Like, I'm not. That's why he's like the super podcaster, the nerd guy. I don't know any of that. Like, I have to look down at my notes because I wasn't smart enough. But then he wrote it on his paper in, writing that is not legible. Is that like
I can
hieroglyphics? Yeah, whatever. Okay, so my next one is, and hey, I also need to preface this by saying this. These are 11 that were identified in the book by Robert Morgan, okay? And so we just decided he was going to take odds, I was going to take even, so I didn't have to like flip them around so I can get them, but I did get this one, and I know you're going to make a comment because I love talking about this guy, and that's Jonah. And there are literally tons and tons of pictures about Jonah. I really, really like this one, because it shows that there is darkness everywhere. I mean, he came out of a ship that, they're throwing things overboard, and they're like, it's about to capsize, like we're going under. And then he jumps into the water, which already is death. And if it can't get any worse than that, then there's some kind of whale, large fish that comes and swallows him. And even though I think Jonah is supposed to be a story about U-turns, I really think it's about when you hit rock bottom. Because he thinks he's getting away from it, and he's not at all concerned about the 120,000 people plus animals in Nineveh. And God says, well, you need to have a better understanding of the depths of despair that God feels for the people who are going through this. And so like when you're going through a difficult time, when you've hit rock bottom, man, that is a great time for you to say, okay, I'm hitting the pause button. I'm just going to spend time, instead of saying, how can I get out of this as quick as possible? Just spend some time, as you like to say, living in that tension, and just like, what can I learn from this? And how can God be glorified through this? So that's number 6.
Jonah 2 is one of my favorite chapters, when like he prays that prayer being in the water, and he talks about the seaweed and everything else.
It's almost like Jonah 2 doesn't belong there, because it's such a beautiful prayer.
It's so faithful.
Yes.
It seems so heartfelt. And then he's just kind of a jerk the rest of the time.
I know. I don't think he turns around as much as people say he does, but that's okay.
Yeah. All right. In our youth, Luke 2, it's a familiar story again. We know Joseph and Mary were good, faithful Jews that every year they went to the temple at the appointed time of Passover. And so they're there, and they would have traveled in a caravan with the rest of the pilgrims from their hometown. And so they thought Jesus was in a different part, most likely, of this group of people. And so he ends up being lost for 3 days. And the whole time he is in the temple, and he's sitting among the teachers. And this is the only story that we get from Jesus' youth. And I just think how important that is for young people to sit among the teachers, whether it be Bible class teachers here, or at youth conferences, or youth camps, or even just a family friend who's strong in the faith. To have those conversations with people that truly are teachers of the Bible for our children to grow in their faith. Because right after that, Luke is going to tell us that Jesus grew in what? In wisdom and in stature. That Jesus is growing in these moments. And that if Jesus needs to do that, then my kids need to do that. And your kids need to do that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, we know our kids love the TikTok. And they can spend hours, scrolling through that. I encourage you young folks I call them young folks, teenagers, adolescents, whatever you want to refer to yourself as, like, instead of spending so much time filling your mind up with some of that junk, I mean, you said, find teachers. There's some really good biblical resources and Christian teaching that you can find on the internet. And so instead of watching for the 85th time, the cat tumbled down the stairs, maybe you could try to watch one of those. Okay, so here's another one. We talked about maybe U-turns could have been in Jonah, but I think the real U-turn story, not even just in the New Testament, but in the entire Bible, is that of Saul. And so, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Is found in Acts, but it's that 3-day period in which he's going to begin this really drastic change that takes place. And so when you're turning your life around, is a great time for you to stop and spend 3 days, spend a period of time where you're like, okay, what is my focus going to be on? In fact, Jesus is going to give a parable like, hey, if you clean out the house, you get rid of the demons, but it stays empty, then, he's going to come back and he's going to bring his friends and it's going to be way worse. And so in the whole idea of I'm going to turn my life around, you need to say, okay, well, what's going to happen after that? And so I think that's an important time where you could use 3 days for that.
Absolutely. My final one is Paul as well, before you preach the word. So at the very end of Acts, Paul's been put in chains. Some of the local political leaders have kind of bounced him around back and forth. And finally, Paul makes his appeal to Caesar. He's sent to Rome. And when he gets to Rome, he's in chains. He's under guard. And he knows he wants to talk to the local Jewish leaders. But he waits 3 days. And so this is Paul who famously tells Timothy, be prepared to preach the word when?
In season and
out of season, right? Always be ready. And yet he waits 3 days. And when these Jews come in, he tells them the gospel. Some believe and some don't. So you and I both have an opportunity to teach and preach. If we're called upon in the spur of the moment, I'm ready to go, right? But I a whole lot would rather have several days to really pray about it and to really be thoughtful about what I want to say. And so Paul takes advantage of those 3 days. Just a fun fact, this is the second time that somebody is in jail and they're using their 3 days.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that probably holds up in real life. That probably is a good time to really think about your life.
Yes. But you don't have to wait until you're behind bars to say, well, you know what? I've got 3 days with nothing to do. Maybe now I'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this last one that I'm going to look at is comes from Acts chapter 10, and this is after Saul has had this conversion. He's going to go to Cornelius, and so there's this 3 days of waiting. And what I think is really special about this is it's not Cornelius who chose those 3 days. It's God chose those 3 days for him. And so sometimes just be aware that when you're waiting, there may be a really good reason why God is saying, okay, I want you to prepare for this, for what's going to happen next. And I quickly become impatient with waiting. Let's just get this over with. And sometimes, the biggest part of it is that waiting. And so it's important for us to remember that. Okay, and then we have one more.
Yeah.
This is the bonus one, and we're going to do this one a little bit together. Number 11.
It's just the resurrection.
Yeah.
And this phrase has been used a lot, but I think the resurrection is just a reminder that God lets him set in the pain and the agony and the reality of what the crucifixion was and still is. And this phrase has been used a lot, but God turns the greatest setbacks into a comeback.
Yeah.
And I wish that I thought of that phrase. I didn't. But ultimately, that's what the resurrection is. And that's what the gospel is the forces of hell and Satan thought that they had won. The disciples thought that everything was lost and vanished. And 3 days later, they're racing to the tomb. They are running in. They are falling on their knees. It's the greatest setback turned into the greatest comeback.
Yeah.
And God chose that 3 day period of just the tension and everything that means.
Yeah. When I was a kid, we used to play a lot of games that required our imagination, and we always ended up playing cops and robbers. I mean, my dad was a policeman, and so we pretended that a lot. And so you had the gun, and ultimately somebody, unfortunately would get shot, And so then they would die. But then what happened next? All you had to do was say do-over or new man. We would say, like, oh, I'm dead, new man. Oh, you're dead, new man. Oh, you're dead, you did. And I just want to ask the question, why did God script it the way that he did? Why did Jesus stay in the tomb for 3 days? Okay. And you say, well, that was prophesied. Well, it was prophesied that because God prophesied that would happen. Why didn't God just say, okay, Jesus, it is finished. He dies. And he's like, oh, new man. And can you imagine that? Can you imagine if Jesus had just floated off of the nails and came down? Can you imagine how incredibly powerful that had been for like the soldiers and everybody around, the women be like, oh, I can't believe that happened. But like you said, I mean, the 3 days was not for the benefit of Jesus. It was for the people around to realize that great loss that they felt. And that really changed. I mean, that's why you see this drastic change in the life of his followers, is because they had the time of what's life like without Jesus. And if he had just floated back off that cross and came back alive, I don't think they really would have had wrestled with that loss that they ultimately ended up.
And the guilt of being the one to sell him out or to leave him. You got Mark, who possibly is one who runs away in the middle of the night, the denial of Peter. John's the only one at the cross. It's like God let them wrestle with all of that.
He let them live in fear behind a locked door after Jesus died. And they had to rethink their future. What is life going to be like now that I don't have Jesus? What would I do differently if Jesus hadn't died? And so when he came back, all of a sudden they're getting a second chance on their lives. And that happened because of that 3 days.
Well, and so much of the pathology that our culture has is us trying to avoid those uncomfortable questions and feelings and those things about our past and those things about us, that we try to numb ourselves with overindulgence of food or alcohol or Netflix or whatever. We spend so much time avoiding those really uncomfortable locked doors where we're wondering, is there hope? What does this mean?
Yeah.
And so God allowed them to just sit in that.
Yes.
And we try to avoid that.
Yeah.
Okay, which is largely what I think we're talking about. And so we've just thrown 11 different things at these people. And I looked at all of them and I'm honest, and I'm not being flippant. I think that I need 3 days of thinking and praying and reflecting to choose which one of these 11 things that I need to spend 3 days focusing on.
Yeah.
I don't say that flippantly, is that we are such a busy culture and we're always doing something. Lance is such a busy person. I don't want to put it on everybody else. Lance is guilty of this. And so we do just want to spend a little bit of time giving you some takeaways and maybe comparing how the Western culture thinks about having 3 days compared to what the Bible does. I think one thing is just being aware of spiritual disciplines. And so I've taught classes about this. I have books. If you want resources, you can come find me. But fasting, silence, solitude, meditation, study, celebration, those are all spiritual disciplines that you can kind of focus in on. But let's just get into some of the biblical things about fasting, and then I'll contrast it with some of the worldly things. Yeah. Or I said fasting, about having 3 days off.
And so what we looked at a minute ago was what are some examples in which would lead you to 3 days of fasting, of prayer, of celebration. And we're going to talk about for a few minutes about, okay, what do those 3 days look like? And I'm going to provide the biblical example. What could I or should I or ought I be doing in those 3 days? And you're going to provide, okay, but what would, if a worldly person had 3 days, what would that look like?
Or even what's the counterfeit version that we might settle for?
Okay.
As a Christian.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too. Even Christians, we find ourselves looking forward to those 3 days, and we sometimes form less spiritual plans for that. And so the first one I would say is, if you're coming in and you have an opportunity to have 3 days, if you have a time, is make it a time of reflection. And that's something we don't like to do a lot of. We're all about like, let's do this and this and this, but reflecting is stopping, and it's spending time in prayer, in silence, in thinking. And so I think it's important for us like to say, hey, if you're going to do a retreat, and I just really don't like when churches do retreats, and I've been guilty of it too, when we plan a retreat and then it's like, okay, we have something planned every hour, every minute of every hour, and like you're going to go, blocking off that time. It's a time to say, hey, it's not about going. It's not about doing. It's about enjoying God's presence. It's about reflecting on what He's done for us.
Yeah. And so I think on the screen there it says Western cultural. Really, it's just the counterfeit of what Doug has mentioned. And so the counterfeit of reflecting is just relaxing. And so reflecting is processing, it's thinking, it's asking the difficult questions. Relaxing is just like I am abdicating all responsibility of thinking about my life. And so that's the counterfeit. Is there a healthy way to relax? Absolutely. It just shouldn't be the default and the go-to every single time.
That's right. I mean, these 3 days really should look very different, because they're supposed to charge you up. It would be nice to say, hey, look, for the next 365 days, we're going to relax or we're going to reflect. But really, it's an opportunity to help us prepare for what comes next. So the next one we have is fasting. I think fasting is very, very, very important. I think it's just so beneficial spiritually. It is a time that you find yourself wanting. It's a time that you're recognizing your humanity, your pains, and how much you need God. I mean, for those of you who've gone through a fast, whether that's been food or your favorite TV show or social media, it gives you a lot of opportunities to reflect.
So I looked up when the biggest times of year in which people buy groceries and alcohol and those types of things, and guess what? It's always before. It's always before a holiday. So indulgence would be the Western cultural counterfeit of fasting, where fasting is feasting upon God. Those lights just came on.
Yeah, I just turned them on.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, it's going to look different. So if you're wondering why it looks different now, it's because Doug turned on the lights.
Yes.
With his fancy phone. But yeah, indulgence is trying to fill yourself up with, food and physical things. And again, God knows our body needs those things, and those things are not necessarily wrong, but ultimately that's not what's going to fill you up. And anytime that Americans get a 3-day weekend sales spike of all those things.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one is biblical. We've talked about reflecting, we've talked about fasting, and now we're going to talk about seeking God's guidance. And I think this is really important because it's not just like, God, how can I get out of this mess? It's, God, where are you going to lead me? And where can I follow you? And so having guidance does not mean that you're all of a sudden, going to be free from all your problems. You might be saying, guide me into this next battle. Like I trust you to lead me into it. And so it's not a running away. It's saying, okay, where are you going to take me next? And so that's going to kind of counterbalance what you're talking about.
And the counterfeit of seeking God's guidance is just escape. Just, I don't want to deal with anything. And so if that's what you're using your 3 days for, and then when you come back, if you're the same and all of your problems are the same, then really you might be a little overweight and maybe rested a little bit, but nothing has fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
So you haven't really changed who you are, and you still have the same problems.
Yeah, and this is a very alluring one, at least for me. And I think for like most of us, we are so busy. We want that escape. The idea of an escape from all the craziness that's going on in life. Like, oh man, that sounds so wonderful. But like you said, if you escape from it but make no changes, then you're going to walk right back into that same situation. Okay, and then the last one is there is a focus on spiritual health. How can I grow? How can I nurture myself? How can I nourish myself? Not only in these 3 days, but also in the coming weeks and months to follow, is how can I stay spiritually healthy? How can I grow spiritually in this next chapter of my life? Whether it be, I'm taking a new job or I'm having this celebration. How does this affect me spiritually, and how can I grow in it?
Yeah. And then the counterfeit of that is just physical pleasure. And so I guess what we really are trying to say here is those things on the right side of the page, like within moderation, there's nothing wrong with those things. In fact, sometimes they're kind of healthy to do. Just don't expect to do those things and then go take on the challenges that we've just described, the 11 things in the Bible. If you're Ezra and you're trying to rebuild the temple, or Nehemiah and you're trying to rebuild the wall, or Esther and you're trying to stare down evil, you can't go and relax and overeat and ignore things and please yourself and then do those hard things. Yeah. And so just don't mistake the two, that if you need spiritual change, if you need transformation, if you need God to do something in your life and through you, and you need to enact change upon the world, you probably need to be working on the left side of the page there.
Yeah. And again, like you said, and I'm glad in our brief conversations before, you pointed out, like, these things on the right are not like pure evil. They're not terrible. God doesn't say don't ever relax. In fact, there's times He calls us, like, you need to relax. There are times that we should, enjoy life and escape and, and enjoy the life of our youth is what we have in Song of Solomon. I mean, these. And
Ecclesiastes says, enjoy your food and drink.
Yeah.
And so we're not saying fast for 365 days a year. We're saying fast when, like, God's called you into it, and when you need spiritual help.
Yeah. And again, some of those can be, I have something tough going on. It could be something really great just happened, and I should spend three days, and find ways to say, how can I include God into this? One thing I saw through these was this, is that on the left side, it's really a focus on God. And then on the right side, it's really just a focus on self. And so it's important, am I doing this, for the glory of God and for the benefit of our relationship, or is this just making me feel good or comfortable, or, do I just want to enjoy the moment? Yeah. And so we just need to remember those. And so there's a couple more things we want to talk about, but one of the things that Morgan says, he says, resting can lead to poise and purpose. Rushing can lead to rash decisions and impulsive actions. And so anytime that you can stop, pause, and think about this, Ramsey will talk about this, Dave Ramsey. Now, when it comes to finances, he's like, whatever you determine is, a big purchase, whatever you set that threshold limit is where you say it's $100 or $1,000 or $10, whatever it is, whatever you say, okay, this is a big purchase, like, don't ever make those big purchases without stopping. The worst thing you can do is, walk onto a car lot and make an impulse purchase because you're like, oh, I was just in the area. And we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, is I think it's really interesting. I wonder how many millions of dollars have been spent by companies to determine what they're going to put right by the checkout center. It's not the stuff that you're going to be like, oh, I'm standing in line, I am craving some broccoli. Like, if I get, the broccoli is not there. They're going to have like chocolate, like when you're sitting there and you're waiting in line, like, oh, this is terrible. Boy, I really could use a Snickers, right? Like, and so think about those things that, like, when we make those impulses, those rarely are healthy decisions.
Yes. And so the moral decisions that we make off the cuff, yes, sometimes are just as bad as the Snickers bar is for our health.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe far worse than that.
So I feel like the point of these 3 days is in Joshua 1:16. So there's 2.5 tribes that have settled on the east side of the Jordan. That they made a promise. They said, okay, if you give us the land here, I'm going to screw it up. Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh, and
I remember the half tribe.
It just falls off the tongue until you don't know it.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Gad,
it's Asher,
and half tribe of Manasseh.
Tribe,
yeah. And so they've agreed that, hey, if you give us this land here, when it comes time to cross the Jordan, we are going to go. And so Joshua circles back around and says, remember your promise. And so this is after the 3 days. And they say this: whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. And so if you spent your 3 days well, that's what you're going to say.
Yes.
That's going to be your answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Regardless of the specific reason for, entering into that 3 days of fasting, of celebration, of meditation, the result should be, as you come out of that, I'm devoting my life to God. It's not like, if you come out of that unchanged, then you've really missed it. And one of the things, the last thing I want to say, and you may want to add on to, but one of the last things that Robert Morgan says in this chapter, he says, there's no point going forward if it's down the wrong path. And so you can have that 3 days of, wow, that was great. But if you don't say, okay, where do I go from here? If it's like, I'm going to go back to the way I was living, or, I'm going to choose this wrong path, there's really no point in stopping in the first place.
So I want to end with a quote. Augustine, who is a writer that I have grown to love, in Confessions, he says, "O Lord, command what you will and give what you command." And I just love that quote because it's just admitting that he's helpless to give God anything unless God gives it to him first. But he says, Lord, if you command it of me, I know that you're going to give it to me. And if you give it to me, I'm going to be faithful and I'm going to give it back. And I just love how he's saying that he's obedient and he's helpless in the same prayer, but that he's going to follow God. And that's just a beautiful quote. And I just want to encourage folks, take a Friday off work. Take a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you need a life change, if there's something going on, if you have a struggle that won't go away, take 3 days, be faithful, spend it in prayer, ask people to pray with you and for you, and see what happens at the end of the 3 days.
Yeah. And if you have something, I've talked a little bit about it. I have an idea for a 3-day retreat sometime later on. Honestly, I'm going to wait till it warms up a little bit. I don't want to be a masochist. I want to go out in a tent when it's 20 degrees, and just sit there and shiver. But I'm planning on that. But that's going to be months away. And so there's still, if you have something coming up, dedicate a time of saying, okay, I'm going to spend, 6 hours in prayer and fasting and meditation. Maybe something really great happened, and before you go spike the football, in the end zone, say, hey, I'm going to spend some time in celebration and thanksgiving. I'm going to block away these hours and say, God, thank you for this, and kind of allow yourself to go through the hardships and thank God for Him allowing you to go through those hardships so you could find yourself in the place where He wanted you to be. Just a couple things, because we're a church family and we care for one another. Just a few announcements about some folks. We do know that Brandon Tanner, who has been in the hospital, he's now back home.
He's home.
He is
went home yesterday.
So just a prayer of thanksgiving for him. Also want to be in prayer for Sam Abney, who's been needing a procedure, but he keeps getting held off. And so we want to ask that you keep him.
That's scheduled for Friday.
It's scheduled for Friday. It was scheduled for last Friday. You're like, I've heard this before. It's been postponed twice now. And so we're hopefully in a couple days he's going to be having that procedure. Also, Julie Smith, she had her surgery. Everything went well, but both her and her daughter Hillary have COVID and so we want to be praying for them. Lynn Blackman had surgery on Monday. Excuse me. And he's doing better, but it's going to be a pretty long recovery for him. And so just pray that he has comfort, and pray that Frida has peace and strength as she's looking after him. And then also just a reminder to be in prayer for the Joan Tucker family who recently passed away. The services are going to be on the 28th, and we'll give you more information as that gets closer. But just lots of reasons for us to be in prayer, both prayer of thanksgiving and prayers of petition. But we want to thank especially all of you. Our prayer is one of thanksgiving that you chose to join us tonight. And so I want to close this out in prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Father God, I thank you for being a good and awesome God, and I thank you for the opportunities that you give us to just slow down and spend time with you. Life can be overwhelming. The decisions that we're forced to make can sometimes seem crippling. And even times we just get lost in the celebration of everything's going great. And so, Lord, I just pray that whatever the situation, that we will pause and we'll take time to reflect on your word. to focus on our spiritual growth and to be better stewards of what you've given us. And let us find ways to allow the kingdom to grow solely for your glory. It's all in your Son's name that I pray.